So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for coming to this week's Lunch and Learn. I'm beyond excited to give this talk today. We are the Alaska Region Invasive Species Program crew, and my name is Mikey.
I'm Aurelia.
Ben. And today we'll be giving our talk with dealing with the invasive species here in Bristol Bay. And before we get started, I just wanted to make sure that all of you know, if you have a question at any point, feel free to ask it. And same goes for my people on the Zoom camera right over there. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go. We'll also do questions at the end, but I'd feel free to just ask them as you feel fit. So that being said, we'll get started. So a brief overview of what we'll be talking today. So I kind of wanted to start from the beginning on what exactly is an invasive species, because sometimes that definition can have some gray area within it. And then what makes an invasive species so invasive? What characteristics are what make it ideal for doing so well in a particular area? And then we'll talk, kind of bottleneck it down to what invasive species are here in Bristol Bay. And of those invasive species, kind of the ones that we think are the highest priority species that we should be dealing with. And then we'll talk about the species that keep us up at night, the ones that we really don't want to make it over here. And once we get you all worried, we'll bring it to what we are doing to prevent that, and not just us as Fish and Wildlife, other agencies and their efforts to help prevent that from doing. And then we'll end it with what everyone can do to help prevent and help with this battle against invasive species. So I wanted to start off by asking you guys, what's your definition of an invasive species? But also, why did you guys come to this talk today? You could say, well, I came to this talk to find out what an invasive species is. That's totally fine. Or I came because I was told that there'd be pizza, which is kind of the reason why I'm up here, which I found out recently that there is no pizza today. So, yeah. Does anybody want to give their definition of what they think invasive species, or why you even came to the talk today? Anybody? Oh yeah, there we go.
I came to learn how to get rid of those dandelions out of my yard.
All right.
Keep my yard green with grass.
Got it.
And bring back the native plants.
Yes, I like you. Anybody else?
You guys got money. You guys get money to hire, get rid of those invasive plants. They're all over.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to an invasive species conference last year, and in that conference, there's a lot of ambiguity on the definition. There's almost arguments. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but there's a lot of confrontation on what exactly is an invasive species. So I thought I'd start out with saying my definition. Sorry, I'm not telling you when to go with the slides. You're doing pretty good. So the definition of invasive species is a non-native species that causes harm to the environment, economy, human, animal, or plant health. Which brings us to the next question: what is a non-native species? These are plants and animals living in an area where they don't naturally exist. So I say all of that with respect to a particular ecosystem. So when I say that, I always give the example, one of my favorite examples is the coqui frog in Hawaii. It's originally from Puerto Rico. It's a small frog. It looks a lot like a tree frog. However, it's called a coqui frog because it has this distinct chirp that goes coqui. Coqui frog, coqui. However, that coqui chirp is at the same decibel as a jet engine. So you're out in Hawaii, you're trying to sleep, and there's thousands of these frogs that have no predators, all chirping as the same decibel as a jet engine. Drive anyone nuts. So they're from Puerto Rico. They can be found in other places like Florida. However, they don't chirp where they're from. They have predators. If they chirp, they will get eaten. So that's an example of they're invasive in Hawaii. However, in other places like Florida, you name it, they're considered non-native. They're not a problem. They're not overpopulated. And then I like to say the native is a species historically occurred or currently occurs in that ecosystem. So I always think of cotton grass or the Sitka spruces. And then another example of a non-native species I like to think of something that you plant in your garden, like a bell pepper type of thing. Bell peppers isn't leaving your garden. We don't have them growing on the side of the road, taking over ecosystems. And next, invasive species typically have these characteristics that will make them outcompete the native species. And with the invasive species that we'll be talking about today, you'll notice that a lot of them will have these characteristics of rapid reproduction. They tend to travel really well amongst the ecosystems. They grow fast. And with the work that we've done around this area, you can see that most of the areas that we're finding these invasions are these disturbed areas like roadsides, places of high traffic, trailheads, gravel pits, you name it. And then after disturbances like fires or floods, typically when that ecosystem is rebuilding, that's when these invasions typically can happen much faster than other places. So I always like to give these these noteworthy invasions because lots of people think, well, how much damage could one invasive species do to an ecosystem? You know? So if you want to go to the next one. So another example that I love talking about, it's a terrible situation, but it's interesting. People like it. Is the Burmese python in Florida. So it's hypothesized that these were people's pets and they released them because they can no longer take care of them. If anybody is familiar with the Burmese python, it is native to Southeast Asia and they can grow up to 23 feet in length from here to the end of those tables over there. And that's a big snake. And it's hypothesized that people can no longer take care of them, so they just released them into the wilderness. It's also hypothesized that there was a Hurricane Andrew in 1992 in which they could have been released from the damage of that hurricane. However, the fact is now there's a new apex predator in Florida. They hunt alligators, they hunt deer, you name it, and they have no predators there. And they're at the point where these pythons will be in Florida for the foreseeable future. If you talk to, it's costing Florida millions of dollars and there's nothing they can really do. So you're wondering, how can a snake from Southeast Asia get established in Florida? Well, it just takes a pet getting released. The next example is the mongoose in Hawaii. Which is actually native to India, and they had a rat problem in the sugarcane plantations. So in order to use as a biocontrol method, they introduced this mongoose to try and eradicate the rats. Well, a mongoose is an opportunistic feeder, and they decided that they like native birds, native bird eggs, turtle eggs instead, as opposed to the rats. So now Hawaii has a rat problem and a mongoose problem. Next one is the kudzu, which they initially brought on purpose, and they thought it'd have other effects as ornamental. They also thought it'd help prevent erosion, and now what they didn't take into account is that could grow for almost a foot a day. So it ends up just swarming the entire ecosystem. You can see this tree up here completely covered in it. It covers building, it covers telephone poles, you name it. And yeah. So going on to the next slide, I know what you're thinking, Mikey, these are all lower 48 problems. None of these species could survive in Alaska. It's too cold up here, it's too north, XYZ. Well, what scares me about Alaska is just in the year April 2022 to May 2023, we had close to 3 million visitors. And these visitors come from all over the world. When you come to visit Alaska, you're not coming to relax. You're coming to go fishing, go hiking, you name it, go out and about. So that's kind of what scares me is we have people coming from all over the world. And when they come, there's potential for them to bring the seeds of where they come from. Another thing that's worrisome is our fishing industry. Over here is a graph that you can see the port of arrival, the port of origin, where all of these boats are coming from, and then where they're arriving. So we also have boats coming from all over. And the thing that's worrisome is the species that we'll talk about later is these boats, they fill up their ballast tanks with the water from that port where they're coming from, and then they travel to our ports and they release that water, which is a great vector for invasive species, which a big one that we'll talk about later, which is particularly keeping me up at night. Another thing is the floatplane culture here in Alaska. There's some invasive species that have been established in other parts, and in the floatplane, it gives you so much freedom to travel within the state. It just takes one fragment of a plant getting stuck onto one of these floatplanes. It can be traveled throughout the state. And then another thing is, whether we like to believe it or not, the temperature of Alaska is getting warmer, and thus more fires, and then more ranges of these species can be able to make it to Alaska. So, and like I mentioned earlier, after those fires, that's typically a time where the invasive species tend to do really well And when that ecosystem is recovering from a fire, an invasive species can really come in and take control. All right.
All right. So like Mikey was saying, you know, these invasive species can damage a lot of our ecosystems, threaten a lot of our native species. But whether we like it or not, you know, money is what makes the world go round. So this is just a little bit kind of talking about what we have to lose kind of financially as well as environmentally. So obviously in Alaska, there's a lot of very land-based, very place-based, you know, events and subsistence and things like that can be threatened by these invasive species when things move in and they can compete with, you know, things we rely on for food, berries, foraging for wild animals, for hunting. You know, there's 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska and 12 Alaska Native corporations that depend on all these species. Obviously, salmon commercial fishing is a big one that can be threatened, and we'll get into kind of exactly how later. And then also just the infrastructure that we rely on for transportation in Alaska, like Mikey mentioned, the float planes and watercraft, but you know, these are also recreational activities, things that could be threatened by invasive species moving in. Hydropower facilities are a big one, and this is just, you know, a few of the issues that we could be facing. So let's talk about what's already here in Bristol Bay, what you might have seen around. So this next slide here, does anyone have a guess as to which of these species are already here, which ones might look familiar to you? Yeah, Janelle.
The bird vetch and the buttercup.
Yeah, nice. Yep, those are definitely two that are here. And here, yeah, here in Dillingham, there's, I guess it depends on how you define the Bristol Bay area. Anyone else?
Well, when the, you know, I noticed when they start doing the construction work, part of their requirements is after they do construction, they have to, you know, fix that landscape before they made a mess, you know, like they
Yeah,
lawns, they put lawn stuff in. The western flowers, and there's some kind of a yellow thing along the sidewalks that's been spreading through the years.
yeah. Definitely.
I've been noticing that every time they do any kind of construction work, it seems to.
Definitely. So those seeds could either be coming on that construction equipment or maybe in the
And
ground.
yeah, a lot of that stuff, some of them they've been taken over for the firewood. We used to always see a lot of firewood, you know, I go between here and up the lake, you know. Even the loop pines go way up that way now, you know.
Totally, yeah, definitely. It outcompetes what we find beautiful and what is supposed to be here, right? So yeah, that creeping buttercup is here in the area. So is the bird vetch along the roadsides. We actually also have a little bit of this white sweet clover, not too much. It's manageable. And then these invasive trees, they're called bird cherry or choke cherry. Those are in people's yards mostly, but they can be spread out into the forest. So I'll go to the next slide. So these are I'm gonna go into more depth on just a few of the high priority species that we're really worried about. There are tons of invasives. It's impossible to kind of cover them all. Those yellow flowers that you were talking about, I think are probably the crepus or dandelions that are out and about. And those ones are definitely invasive, but they have fewer harmful effects on the environment. So we don't focus on eradicating them when they're spread by wind, they're spread everywhere. So it's almost kind of beyond our scope.
Just say they don't mess with my berries.
Yeah.
Gotta have my berries.
Yeah. So yeah, these creeping buttercup, bird vetch, and white sweet clover, like I mentioned. And then let's see the next slide. There's three more. Sorry. So these are the orange hawkseed, the bird cherry and choke cherry trees, like I mentioned, and then that's oxeye daisy down there, and then we'll go into more depth on each of these. So we'll talk about what's at risk with each of these, and really the main kind of harmful effects are the same for most of them, is that they outcompete native vegetation. They could outcompete berry bushes and plants, native flowers like fireweed. They could, you know, and they have been harming those populations. So that's a really big risk with pretty much all of these. You'll see the common theme. Usually the common theme is also that they're really good at reproducing quickly, so they usually have multiple modes of reproduction, not just seeds, but also usually through creeping. In the case of these ones, creeping stolons, which are, you know, kind of like roots that go above the soil, and they kind of just colonize really quickly, push out native vegetation. And in some cases, like this creeping buttercup, they're actually poisonous to grazing animals and can be to birds as well. This creeping buttercup, it does really well in really hydrated soils and roadsides and things. So we actually found this along the banks of the Togiak River. So that's a big issue, that it's kind of just colonizing that whole area. And it's actually growing in the water in some places. And we found it at a couple places around like Nurka and things like that. So they're coming on either people's shoes or maybe on floatplanes and finding their way to these like pretty remote places and then are pretty much going unchecked. So the
We've
next,
seen those kind of stuff in our childhood years. We've seen those kind of flowers. They've
You
been
have?
around a long time.
okay,
I grew up in Elephant, you know.
okay,
And the monk's fruit, we had those down along the coast, you know.
yeah,
And then I noticed on social media, they say that monk's fruit poisonous, you know. But
definitely.
we always stick them, it never bothers, you know.
Yeah. There's like native ones that are poisonous, but it's unfortunate when these other ones move in and then they, you know, like to be eaten by, or birds and things like to eat them, and then that could be a big problem. But yeah, there's definitely ones
Those
that are-
have been around quite a while,
yeah.
yeah.
So this is just a little way to ID it. So if you do see them around something that looks like this, these ones have like trifoliate leaves that are toothed like this. So you can kind of see there's like distinct kind of lobes of the leaf. And they have a stem in between. And then they have these are the sepals, and they go upward on the flower, so they kind of cup it rather than a lot of the native ones go down. So they kind of like curve down like that. So that's just a way to distinguish between things that are meant to be here that look kind of similar. It also grows really horizontally and creeping, like the name suggests. So that's just one way to identify it. The next one, bird vetch. This one is along the road system here. It was likely brought with construction equipment or in a seed mix after they tried to clean up, you know, the side of the road. They might have put down some seeds, and this could have been in there, unfortunately. It's been in Alaska for a few decades, but it came as a forage plant for grazing animals. And it actually has these vines that kind of smother other vegetation. This was out on Surback Road. On Wednesday, we went and pulled a bunch of it, and it was growing up this whole, you know, signpost here. And that was just obviously from one season. It had grown all the way up. So that was kind of concerning to see. It's pretty obviously different than a lot of the other purple flowers here. Mostly they're a lot smaller, the flowers are, than like lupin, and then it has really curly viney tendrils like that come off of it. And it also is really popular with pollinators. We had a ton of bumblebees on it. And that can really alter the pollination ecology of the area if they're like really focusing on this one plant that we don't even want here, and they're spreading that pollen, and it's like not helping. Next one.
Can you explain the last bullet, fixes atmospheric nitrogen?
Yeah, so because it's kind of a legume, it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. And then when we remove it and things, like it doesn't allow for the nitrogen to distribute to native plants. So there are native plants that do that too, but it does alter the soil conditions when those kind of those nutrients are not going to native plants and not staying in the soil and things like that. So, yeah. So this is white sweet clover. Like I mentioned, this is on the roadsides too. We pulled some of this. This is like a really tall plant, and the major problem with this one is that it is really good at erosion control, which we usually think of as a good thing, and that's probably why it's part of these like seed mixes for roadsides and things. But it's a big problem when it gets onto sandbars in rivers. And this has happened a lot in the interior of Alaska. It doesn't allow for the river to shift and move like they should, which is really important for you know, the ecosystem, and moving around nutrients and things like that. So when these get established, this plant gets established on sandbars, it can just increase sedimentation, meaning, you know, more sand, more sediment is accumulating in one area and it's not allowing for those shifting patterns. The seeds are also viable for 81 years after they are in the soil, which is, you know, that's a human lifetime, not just one seed. So every year that gets pushed out, every time that the plant is seeding, which is really concerning. Again, it's toxic to animals. I don't know why it was introduced as a forage plant, but it's interesting. The other thing is it's allelopathic, which means that it poisons the soil. Actually, it releases toxins so that other seeds can't germinate. So other species, it actually poisons out other plants, so that it can be the only thing growing in that area. This is another one that poisons, is allelopathic and poisons the soil. This is our like #1 enemy. And this is only here in Dillingham, we've only seen it in the cemetery and along like the seawall walkway. So it's not too far spread yet. But it creates really dense mats, really dense mats, and it just totally outcompetes everything else. It's really good at distributing, so we've seen big populations down in Cold Bay. It's just, we think it started at the airport, and it's just, the airport's up on a hill. All of the water that runs off that has just created this like huge field of orange hawkweed in just a few years, which is a huge problem. And then we see it out in pretty remote areas where there's like a garden or something that's planted it, and then it's tracked around by bears, by people walking. And it just goes out way into the tundra, and you just see. So any of these orange flowers that you see are probably orange hawkweed around. There's not any other orange flowers in Alaska that are native, other than in Southeast. But if you see orange flowers, please report that, and we'll go over how to do that. Okay, so this is that tree that I was talking about, bird cherry and chokecherry. So these are still sold in nurseries. They're available for people to plant. And they do great up here. They're from Europe and Siberia and things. So like they definitely evolved for a colder climate. Some of them are native to, there's one species that's native to the rest of the United States, but not up here. The birds love these fruits. They spread them way out. It also reproduces by suckering. So even if you like cut off a limb and you left it on the ground, that thing can resucker and restart a whole new tree and set like several trees. So that's the big thing. The really big problem with this is it kills moose. So the bark contains cyanide, which is toxic. And if we go to the next slide, it's happened a lot actually in the last few years. It's from 2011. Yeah, updated in 2016. There's a lot of moose deaths that have been, you know, autopsied and have been linked to the consumption of the bark from these chokecherry trees. They're for some reason really popular with moose in the winter. They browse them really heavily, more than alders for some reason, in the areas where they are. And a lot of moose calves mostly are the ones that are dying as a result of this. But that's hard to see, so. Yeah. One. Last one I'll go into in great depth. What's here is oxeye daisy. So you may have seen this along the roadways and things. There are a couple other daisy species that it looks like, just the flowers look like them. And I'll go in a second into the leaves. But this grows really densely. Actually, it doesn't just affect roadsides, it affects grasslands as well. And there's some studies in Alaska that out in native grasslands, it's sometimes replaced up to 50% of the native grasses, just with this monoculture of oxeye daisy. It's toxic to insect herbivores, and it's also the host of a lot of plant viruses that can affect other flowers that look like that. So. Next one is just how to identify between the two. This is a native daisy that this picture was actually taken on Round Island by someone who was researching the walrus. But this is, you can see the leaf shape is pretty different. This is what the leaves of the invasive oxeye daisy look like, and this is the native Arctic daisy. And they're the native ones are a little squatter too. The oxeyes grow really tall. Alright, so looking ahead, like Mikey said, these are the ones that keep us up at night. We're so nervous about these getting into Bristol Bay. This is a freshwater species. This is a Aurelia waterweed, and then these are a marine species, so European green crab. I'll talk about how they might get here. Next slide. So Aurelia, we're really worried because just like everything else, it creates a monoculture, and these aquatic environments are much more susceptible to invasives. There's just less environmental factors and things that can control the population. So this is just like a little cartoon of what it might look like before Aurelia and after Aurelia. And this is happening in Anchorage, in the Matsu Valley. We're seeing that salmon populations are really affected. Actually, it's estimated that the sockeye fishery has to spend $159 million a year in trying to mitigate these effects to their I don't know, their income, because the Aurelia grows mostly in salmon red habitat kind of, so like where the salmon are reproducing. If they are just completely taken over by Aurelia, it'll prevent spawning in those areas. It also impedes recreation, gets caught in propellers, gets caught in float planes. And that's what's really scary, is that one fragment can start a whole new population. So all it takes is one plane coming from the Anchorage area to Bristol Bay with this on its rudder or whatever, and then it can start a whole population here. So the next slide, this is what it looks like. This is only 1 centimeter, so it's pretty small, but it's still bigger than a lot of the native vegetation. And it grows really long, which is the scary part. But there are these like leaves of 3 is how you identify it. And so we're trying to get the word out to please be, vigilant when you're out in freshwater environments. What kind of vegetation might be growing there. Yeah, this is again just that same figure like you showed earlier of all the float plane flights, but this is where the Aurelia is, and clearly people are coming here with their float planes and things. And Kara, the pilot biologist at the refuge, goes out and looks for it a lot, and we went out and looked with her, but it's evident how quickly it could establish and how it could be a really big problem.
Have you seen it in the lakes here?
No, it's not here yet. Knock on wood, yeah.
So they grow around the rivers.
Yeah, it could grow in rivers. It's typically more of a lake plant and pond plant, but it could be in rivers.
It's surprisingly true.
And yeah, so the next picture I'll show, it grows under the ice, which is the really scary part. So most of the native vegetation, aquatic vegetation, will die over winter and have to start all over again in the spring. This is from the photo credits Fairbanks Soil and Water Conservation District. So this is in Fairbanks. They're finding it growing under the ice. So that means it has that leg up on native vegetation, that it can just keep going throughout the winter, even in the interior where obviously conditions are pretty harsh. This is up in the Anchorage area. That's what it looks like. So imagine that in your prop and your, paddling, anything. It'd be so easy for one fragment. So it's a pretty scary thing. This is a video. I don't know if you can play it. We don't play the whole thing, but this is just showing. This is in Little Campbell Lake in Anchorage. Kind of what it looks like. Just really drive that point home if I didn't scare anybody. So yeah, no other native vegetation here grows that densely. You can just imagine a salmon trying to spawn, and that would be. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, one more really scary doom and gloom. This is the European green crab. This is the species that Mikey was referring to with the marine species. So this is in the ocean. It's making its way up from San Francisco, where it came in a ballast tank of a shipping vessel, taking up water in Europe, coming across, dumping that ballast into San Francisco Bay, and then it's been traveling northward up the Pacific coast, just kind of on its own. It really disrupts habitats of burrowing crab. It pretty much clear cuts eelgrass meadows, which are really important for native crabs, which are really important for seabirds and a lot of marine species. Again, Alconquista native crabs are foraging habitat and actually also consumes juvenile Dungeness crabs. That's been proven, and a lot of other native mussels, clams, things like that. And so the way to identify that is those 5 original teeth on the side of the carapace, and then 3 rostral bumps between the eyes, and then 5 more teeth. So 5, 3, 5. That's how you identify those. And what we're doing is kind of walking beaches, looking for crab molts and kind of trying to get it that way, seeing if it's here. The unfortunate thing with a marine species like this is it's really difficult to control. It's kind of coming on its own anyway. But I guess the sooner we know it's here, the sooner we can kind of react and try to get ahead of it. So that's another thing that, you know, the public can do is kind of be monitoring your beaches, looking for anything that looks out of the ordinary, things like that.
How far north and west have they been found?
Lake Metlakatla is the first Alaska detection, and it's heading north from there. I don't remember where the last.
Yeah, it's just, the new detection and I think Wishnek Inlet, which is a little bit out of Metlakatla this year, that's the farthest north they found it. But it's just in southeast Alaska, and it just, 2022 was when it first detected there, so they're relatively new.
So they're definitely making their way into Alaska.
All right, so now that everybody hopefully isn't worried and depressed after everything we talked about, we're gonna kind of shift into what folks are doing to help prevent the invasive. So I'll kind of talk about the work that we're doing on the refuges. So we're a strike team essentially, which is like there's, I don't know, like 10 or 15 of us around the country. The strike teams, we're based in South Central Alaska, where we work primarily on refuges, but our program works on and adjacent to refuges. So meaning like we work on the refuges, but we also work with the communities and places that are right next to the refuges. So if there's nothing on the refuge, but there's something in the community that could get on the refuge, we work with the community to both help the community out and help the refuge out. So it's kind of a win-win situation. So our projects our primary projects we've been working on are at Togiak, where we are now, and then Alaska Peninsula and Bisharoff refuges, and then Eisenbach. So if you wanna go ahead to the next slide. So with our work, we work doing early detection and rapid response, which is essentially trying to find infestations when they're very small. Because it's most cost effective to get them when they're small. If it's something that's like the size of this room versus something that we find when it's like the size of this table, we're much more likely to eradicate it. So we're focused on trying to find stuff when it's small and then rapidly respond to it. So you might hear me say EDRR, that's early detection, rapid response. So and rapidly responding to it means we have a bunch of tools in our toolbox and trying to find the best tool to respond to that with. So gonna go to the next slide. So progress made with terrestrial invasives and the 3 projects. Kind of what we do the first year of a project. We go and kind of do systematic, meaning we stop at predetermined points alongside the road system. So we did this last year, and through stopping at the predetermined points as well as stopping at areas where people congregate, like schools, airports, kind of a thing. This is kind of a map of all the higher priority species we found in the Dillingham area last year. And then we over the winter we talk with the refuge and talk with the community and partners to try to figure out how we're going to address that. So a good example of rapid response from one of our projects in king salmon. This is white sweet clover. It was a fairly small infestation. It was found in front of 2 vehicles in 2021 when we were there. We worked with partners over the winter in 2022 and got a plan together and did a treatment, or over the 2021-22 winter. And then 22, we did the treatment, and then this is 23 last year. We found a tiny little sprig and just were able to pull it like that, and then, the same when we went back this year, it was just like one little sprig and we pulled it, so that's a great example of finding something that's literally the size of a table. And for our bigger infestations, when we're doing treatments, we monitor, so this is a map kind of showing like coverage of the different species at kind of random places around the infestation. With the lighter colors being less plants and then the darker colors being more plants. So we do this over time to make sure that we're making the right decisions and spending our money effectively, because if we weren't able to quantify our impacts, that we really wouldn't know how effective we are with our work. So that's something we do with some of our projects. And then for aquatic invasives, for the Aurelia survey, so there's a bunch of different ways to look for Aurelia. If it's a smaller lake, we have a kind of a more systematic, meaning like there are predetermined points we go to. That's what we're doing here in near King Salmon, where we throw a rake out at all these points and kind of pull it back in, and the rake, we can look to see if there's Aurelia on it. But for bigger lakes and kind of like the situation we have here, if we were to follow that protocol, it would take us the whole summer to do like Lake Nurga, or essentially like that. So we have to kind of switch our tactics a little bit. And Kara at the refuge has done a really good job of kind of honing in on places where people go a lot, where Aurelia is more likely to focus, and kind of just focusing on those areas. So other aquatic invasives work, the zebra and quagga mussels are another invasive. We hadn't really talked about them too much, but there's something that's a lower 48 problem that's not up here yet. But we're kind of doing some baseline water quality surveys around the state now to figure out where they might be able to establish, so that we can focus our monitoring effort, or early detection monitoring efforts there. The European green crab that was mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a couple of different ways to survey for that. We can do a trapping, which our project in Cold Bay, we've done trapping the last couple of years to monitor for it. And then there's also beach molt walks that you can do, which are really simple. It's like a 20-minute walk along the beach and then look for the molts, and it's fairly easy to distinguish the different species. So the molt walks, actually, when we were in Togiak, we did some molt walks there. So that's
Probably, Bristol Bay, our main food is salmon. So if you guys have, everybody knows, the local people know where all the salmon spawning habitat areas are, and that when you got the lakes about now, for the rivers and creeks, you can tell that salmon, old man salmon is all rich, so those are the primary things to be along the river creek edges where they habitats are, there's lots of rivers and creeks up there.
Yeah, that's definitely an area. I know that Kara's kind of focused on a lot of those areas where she's surveying, so that's a lot of the places we are looking. And then another kind of thing we do is, is the outreach component of everything. We've used a bunch of different types of tools, engaging the public, engaging different partners through avenues like a Facebook Live event that we did in 2021, or tabling at like Festival. They have a knack we've done a couple of times, and then just informal outreach, so just talking to people on the street, like if we're out surveying, and people love to stop and ask if there's a problem when we're surveying by the side of the road, which is a great chance to say, no, there's not a problem, but this is what we're doing. So there's kind of informal interactions like that. And then if you can go to the next slide. So kind of from our team going up to what's going on regionally, a couple of different things. This is a map that has a bunch of lakes that are prioritized. As y'all are well aware, the Bristol Bay area, there's a ton of lakes. And to be able to most wisely spend our money and time. We're we're wanting to make sure that we go to lakes that are most likely to have infestation. So there's a group, Southwest Aurelia Task Force, it's been working the last couple of years to get a prioritized list together to go out and survey and kind of coordinate with one another. So that's an example of something that's going on here. There are prioritization workshops that we've been doing with some of the refuges where we get lists of sites and species that might be or are on the refuge. And we work with them to try to determine which are the priority ones to go after. So again, we know that we're wisely spending our money and not just kind of chasing our tails.
These type of projects should be spread out, you know, I worked for about 20 years with the Bristol Bay tribes, but my folks was on marine mammals, but you know, each of the villages, they have what they call IDAP, environmental program. Now, somehow the university system and the agencies, they collaboratively get funding for that. The environmental communities, you know, IDAP environmental communities, they could be trained to.
Yeah, and
Enhance the project and not be with just your agencies.
yeah, and that's something that's huge, like all the villages and getting a lot of different
That
stakeholders
that
involved.
provide long-term employment, you know.
Exactly, yeah, we've been working with Cassandra at BBNA a little bit, talking about this, and like, I think next year, we wanna talk to her about going to more villages and getting the information spread out more, so.
Beyond, I'll make sure it happens, but I'm retired.
And then, yeah, one other group to mention is the Alaska Invasive Species Partnership. I know we're kind of running short on time. I'm gonna whiz through the last little bit, but the Alaska Invasive Species Partnership is a bunch of organizations, so federal, state, local, nonprofit, universities, everybody that works on invasives gets together once a month to have a call to kind of say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? How can we help each other? Because invasives don't recognize the boundaries that we draw, like, oh, here's a refuge, here's a city, like they don't recognize that. So we all kind of we recognize that, and we have pool our resources to work on everything together. Go to the next slide. So where to next? There are a bunch of different ways that we could think about moving forward. I think with invasives, we have a pretty good foundation of stuff, but there are other avenues for the Bristol Bay area, like all these dots are where there's a cooperative invasive species management area, which is kind of like the similar to the invasive species partnership, but it's at a much smaller scale of like a region where a bunch of partners sign a memorandum of understanding to make sure that they can actually like help each other out when something gets on somebody else's land. So that's something that I think would potentially be something to think about for the Bristol Bay area. But before we get going down that road, we want to make sure that whatever we do to keep working on this in the area is relevant to everybody, intentional, to make sure that we're not just saying, yeah, let's do this, but to make sure everybody has buy-in, and then inclusive, so that everybody that wants to be a part of it is at the table. So that I'll get it over to Mike for the last few minutes.
All right, so what can you all do in this fight against invasive species? So hopefully you're all scared now, not too scared, but you know that, you know, you want to fight the fight against invasive species. And the main thing, I think, if you could take one point from this, is clean your gear every time. You can go to the next slide again. So when you're on the water, it's CDD, clean, drain, dry. So if you have a boat, you gotta clean it. You don't wanna go from one body of water to the other without cleaning it, because that's how the lodia would spread. You don't wanna bring bodies of water from one to another, because that's also how mussels could spread. CDD, it's really easy to remember. If you guys can't remember that, we just so conveniently have stickers. All right, so make sure to grab one of these before you guys leave. And if you're like, Mike, I don't have a boat, well, clean your friend's boat, clean your mom's boat, just clean a boat. Don't let our aquatic hitchhikers. And you go into the next one. On the trail, we say choose impervious materials, but that's always not, you know, the best thing, the most, what's the word I'm looking for?
Not always an option.
Not always an option for you guys and stuff. So we would like that because seats can always travel with your boots. There's lots of boot brush stations around. And if you're like, Mike, we don't have a boot brush station at my favorite hiking spot, we have these boot brushes back there that all of you guys can use to make sure to clean your boots. So you don't transfer the seat.
That's good.
Yeah, so make sure that you clean your boots before you go into other areas and make sure you just be vigilant with that stuff. And you go into the next one. And in the gardens, we don't want you to plant a problem, and we like to use certified weed-free gravel. And then we'd like for you to eradicate, if you do see one, eradicate it. And if you're thinking, well, Mike, I don't know what's invasive and what's not, we conveniently have these for everyone here, so it's a nice guide, and I hope that you all take one home with you. But if you guys are more, you guys, if it's, you know, it's 2024, if you like the internet, if you like apps, we also have an app that you can use to help identify, so you don't need to carry this around with you at all times, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And then another way to fight the fight for invasive species is getting involved. There's lots of other agencies, not just Fish and Wildlife, Alaska Invasive Species Partnership, Alaska Invasive Species Awareness Week. There's all sorts of different agencies that are doing outreach and removal events. So you guys can really get out and about in the community and get that awareness out there. You go to the next one. There's several ways to report it. We have this hotline that you guys can call at any time if you do find it. And then here's that app that I was telling you guys about. You might as well just download it now. Probably be useful later. And then if you don't want to call, there's also an online website that you guys can all go to and you could report it all that way. So there's several different ways to report it. So I think that'll be good. I know me, I always second guess some of my identifications on certain things, especially in different areas. So I usually have one of these on me at all times, but also the app does work really well. And yeah, on to the next one.
Yeah, so this is just kind of summing it all up, what we have to lose. Like I said, there's a lot of you know, financial loss that goes on with invasive species, but it's important to remember the big picture. And you know, these are the big pictures of what's going on, what you have to lose with invasive species. Here is an example of rats in the Aleutian Islands, all these seabirds that used to be there, the seals, and now there's nothing but rats and maybe a couple of birds. And then, you know, again, just the resources, the berries and the fish that we kind of have to lose if we don't take this kind of battle with invasive species seriously. And yeah, stay vigilant, all that. Have fun with it. Doesn't have to be all terrible. But yeah, we're definitely, we go to the next slide here. We have, you know, a special that has a quote up there, just that we have a unique opportunity in Alaska that we have been able to slow the spread of invasive species, unlike a lot of the states in the lower 48. And then around the rest of the world. So I think we have a really unique opportunity and a good shot at keeping Alaska, you know, mostly clear of these problems. Yeah, that's all for us. If anyone has any questions, feel free. Yeah.
So with the what looks like rampant Alodia in Anchorage, it just seems inevitable that it's gonna make it out here on a floatplane. I mean, once you take off, there's no way to check your floats when you're already in the air. So what's
Yeah.
how do you stop that?
Did we mention it's keeping us up at night?
Yeah, it's a good question because yeah, like you said, you can't. It's not like you're going to get out on your rudder while you're in the air and try to figure it out, try to clear it off. It's a unique problem for sure. It's not something that the lower 48 encounters with much. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I think just outreach and then early detection, like getting people out on the ground and like working with partners to be able to get out on the ground and find things early, because it's like when it does show up, we wanna find it when it's the side of the
Yeah.
table, not the road.
So you work with like flight services and Anchorage and
Yep,
make sure,
yeah.
so they're pretty on board and understanding and.
Yeah,
and-
there's a bunch of different partners that are being worked with on the Aurelia stuff, the Seaplane Pilots Associations, there's a bunch of different other groups.
The
That's the nice
logics.
thing about all of the Aurelia work that we've done in Alaska so far, all the outreach that we've done, everyone's been more than open to learning about it, because they don't want that to be established either, so it's been this nice community of everyone on the same page. Sometimes you can't say the same thing for other types of invasive species, people care less type of thing, but I think everyone's on the same page that they don't want Aurelia getting established. Which is nice.
So actually, how do you physically get rid of Aurelia? I mean, you try to pull it out, but it has these tubular, or, I mean, how do you get rid of it?
There are a couple of different ways. Typically what folks have used, there are a couple of different herbicides that people put in the water, but it's not the ideal. There are some herbicides that are kind of more strong than others, and we try to use the ones that have less impact, so and just focus on areas where it is so that we can keep the native vegetation. But there's also the option that a lot of people haven't looked into up here. But some people might start doing is getting like a modified gold dredge and then using it like a vacuum and just like suck it out that way. So, but if you do that, just there's the risk of fragmentation. So that's something we have to.
The management of it doesn't look pretty, it doesn't look cheap.
Yeah.
My question was, when I'm walking the seawall and I see the orange flower, what do I do? Can I rip it out of the ground, throw it in the bay, or does it just come right back?
You can, if you have a pair of scissors or something, just snip the little seed head off, because
Yeah,
all those seeds are another potential way to have it reproduce. And that one, like with the manual removal, doesn't work terribly well on that. So that's one that we often have to think about doing chemical treatment on,
Yeah,
but.
it spreads by rhizomes, so unless you were able to like, get everything, like if it's one plant, you might be able to dig it out. But yeah, like Ben mentioned, I think also just make sure that seed head goes right into like a Ziploc baggie or something, and that like gets thrown away or burned or whatever, like, you don't wanna be like, oh, a seed head, okay, like I'll just take it out. And I think even in the bay, that's a good point with like the salt water. I don't know if it would kill the seeds though with how persistent they are. Maybe it just floats it down and then it gets up on the beach next high tide. Yeah, I'm sorry, we didn't answer your question about how to get rid of your dandelions.
Yeah.
the ongoing battle.
Yeah. That's one that's hard because it's, spread by wind.
Yeah,
And I mean, there's a lot of evidence that bears actually really like the greens and things like that, so it's hard to try to get rid of, I guess. Yeah.
my family and my neighbors were pretty good at picking them when we first see them, but now my neighbors are starting to move away.
Oh,
My
no.
mom who's out there picking them.
Yeah.
She's losing the battle.
Yeah. It's hard when they're dispersed by wind,
Yeah.
You're like, oh, what am I supposed to do about that? Yeah.
A lot of them got runners underneath when you dig. In the springtime, early springtime, the first time to dig them stuff up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, before it blooms and everything. Yeah.
That looks like, you don't know tell you what's underneath.
As a general rule of thumb, should people try to remove them if they recognize just in general an invasive species, or what should they do? They report it to Fish and Wildlife
It's
locally,
tricky 'cause
or
it's like private land.
Yeah, it really depends on the species. If there's something that you see, give one of us a call and we can talk through the different options, so.
Yeah, it doesn't usually hurt to try to just pull it, because at least it'll prevent it from going to seed, you know, that season. So that's something we're doing. We're too late to do any kind of herbicide application on some of the roadside species here because it depends on the seasonality. You don't want to apply chemical and then have that sit and not kind of degrade. So we are just pulling like the bird vetch and the white sweet clover off of the side of the road. And we're just trying really hard to make sure we're not shaking seeds off that. But if that's done earlier in the season, before it flowers, before it goes to seed, then it might come back next year from the roots, but at least you're preventing that seed from getting in there for another 81 years, you know?
So we'll see you guys next year in May.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll see us in 81 years.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to be able to be everywhere at once, and that's something that we're still trying to figure out. 'Cause this is still, I don't know, this is the 4th field season that this program has been going, and we have projects at all these refuges, and we're still working to balance, okay. We have these places that we've surveyed and we found these infestations, but there's still so many places, like a lot of the villages that were mentioned that haven't been surveyed, so how do you balance? A short window for doing the surveying and also doing the application, you have to have the wind be less than 7 miles an hour and no rain, which in Southwest Alaska, good luck with that. So, we're trying to balance like figuring out where to go, and that's
Yeah, the more we look, the more we find.
Yeah.
so.
There's many foundations that you guys, get multi-year grants, you know, there's like, Oak Foundation. Stuff like that work with tribes big time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're really good partner. Started talking to the folks in Togiak and they're over there, and then Cassandra that works at BBNA here, she's been an awesome champion with what we're doing.
Some of those, villages have their community districts too, I noticed Togiak has that.
The tribal conservation districts, which
Yeah.
that's another avenue that we work with, like the Ionex Tribal Conservation District in South Central, they're doing a lot of invasive stuff.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.